So you agree that, based on your reading of that statute, that it's likely that Trump is violating the law by not issuing the orders to the governors, correct?
I mean, he's got a lot of lawyers. He's clearly had legal advisement. Clearly they don't want him to break the law.
So I can never show you. I can never provide anything that would show you that he's breaking the law, right? Because he has lawyers.
Fair enough, but how does this get past White House counsel? How's White House counsel looking at this? Because
they're all loser scum who are sycophants to Trump. By that logic, presidents can never do anything illegal because they always have White House counsel. Are the ICE protesters trying to overthrow the government?
Probably some of them, yeah. I mean, that guy you had here, two back, sounds like he'd be partial to that. Anarchist,
so you agree Jan 6 is a rebellion, right?
Let's just stick on the topic.
Wait. Okay? I just want to make sure you're consistent. So do you agree Jan 6 is a rebellion?
I don't get into all the facts.
Wait. So you're unable to say whether Jan 6 is a rebellion, but you think that it's probable this is a rebellion?
All right, let's just get off Jan 6.
Yeah, because you don't like it because you guys are inconsistent. You guys are inconsistent, and your definitions, you don't apply consistently.
I don't know that much about Jan 6.
Dude, you're such a f***ing weasel. Hey, folks, please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description. Yo, what up, Erkling? Disagreement?
Yes, disagreement.
All right, hit me.
So I think I'm like a lot of people, I saw the video of the people. They were surrounding the ICE building, right? And I was like, oh shit, here it goes, right? Here it goes. It's going to be the BLM riots over again. Just again, it's going to be this. And I think Trump, he saw that too. It happened. They happened during his first term. And I think he wanted to, get ahead of it. And not with, anything illegal. And you don't contend that he's doing anything illegal, right?
Trump?
Yeah.
Yes, I think he's doing something illegal.
Really? Why?
I think he's invoked a statute that purports to give the power to federalize the National Guard to the President of the United States. And he's used that statute to give direct commands through the Secretary of Defense. And the statute clearly lays out that needs to be done through the governors. And it's not being done through the governors, and therefore he's violating that statute. And then I don't believe it pertains to the U.S. Marines. And so I don't think that what he's doing is legal.
Okay, well, we agree that he's doing this through an executive order. And with that order, he's invoking, I'm not up on all the legal jargon, but I'll just read it as I can. 10 USC 12406, right? Is that
so? 10 USC. Hang on, let me actually get the actual thing. Do.
And just before you do, let me seize on. You said that the Marines are not pertinent to the statute that he's invoking, if that is in fact the statute he's invoking. Now, see here, it's language. There's federal service members. Is that a legal term of art?
Oh, then it might include. Hang on, it might include them, but just give me a second. Okay. I think it's for the National Guard, but I could be wrong about that. Just give me a sec. 12406.
406, yeah.
So it says the president may call into federal service, may call into federal service members and units. Okay, so I guess it would include federal service members and units of the national. So I think I was wrong about the Marines. Oh, I'm sorry. I was wrong when I said. I read this wrong when I said that this includes the Marines. The president may call into federal service members and units of the National Guard of any state. So I was wrong when I said that includes. That's another reason why this is illegal, because they're including the Marines and they haven't invoked something to do that. So the president may call into federal service members and units of the National Guard of any state. So it's specifying that they'll be under federal service, and the president will be able to command them, right? So the president, when you call into federal service, what's different than the National Guard is that the president is in charge, as opposed to when the National Guard is under state service. Okay? So the president is now in charge. He's calling into federal service members and units of the National Guard of any state in such number. So it's specifically. Did you ever play Mass Effect 2? It's a game.
No.
Okay, so there's a part in it where it's like a hive mind, and they're like assuming direct control. The president is assuming control of the National Guards, right? So it is federal service. So you need to have this law because it specifies it. But the law says that the president orders go through the governor. So even though they're in federal service, the governor is taking charge to like enforce the laws. It's basically setting up a command structure where the president is ahead on top of the governors, but and so they are commanding for federal purposes, but the governors are still involved.
It still has to run through the
Right.
governors. Okay.
Exactly. Orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states, or in the case of the District of Columbia, through the commanding general of the National Guard of the District of Columbia. Agreed that the orders are not being issued through the states, correct?
Orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states, or in the case of the District of Columbia, through the commanding general of the National Guard of the District of Columbia.
So do you agree that the orders are not being issued through the governor of California?
It would seem.
So you think more likely than not that they're not issuing orders through the governor of California. Agreed on that?
Orders for these purposes shall be issued.
I'm just asking you a question about the facts.
You read that and you really wish you had read the last sentence, right? And you being me, of course. Yeah, no, it is, yeah.
Okay, so wait, so you agree that they're not going through the governor, right?
Yeah.
So you agree that he's not following this law, therefore.
Is this the basis of California's lawsuit against him?
This is the basis of Trump's invocation. This is the law he cited.
Sure, but like this sentence, is this like the main argument that they're using?
I haven't read the lawsuit, so the answer is I don't know.
California's suing.
I haven't read the lawsuit, so the answer is I don't know.
The answer is you don't know. Okay. Orders for these purposes shall be okay. So like, let me be honest. Like I see this, and it's clear language, and it's like I'm not a lawyer. I can understand that this looks like a violation of law. So
wait, so more likely than
he's
not,
got a lot of lawyers under his retainer, right?
Okay.
A lot of good lawyers. How is he just using breaking the law? Like I don't.
Do you think he's probably breaking
Maybe
the law?
Just something I'm not understanding here is what I think.
Yeah, Trump is breaking the law. That's why I said he's breaking
I
the law.
don't know. I don't know.
Wait, but it says that the orders need to go through the governors, and they're not going through the governors. So how could he not be breaking the law?
What does through the governors mean? Like what is through mean? Like
that the governors give the orders. That he give the order to the governor gives the order.
Oh, so he gives the order to the governor, and the governor gives the order.
Yeah, they're through the governors are the ones who are like controlling and operationalizing. That's clearly what's meant here, right?
Okay,
but he's excluding the governors.
When Eisenhower sent in, the National Guard, was that the Insurrection Act?
Yeah, he could have invoked the Insurrection Act, which is different.
Wait, did Eisenhower do that? Insurrection Act?
Let me look at all the invocations of the Insurrection Act. It doesn't matter, but we can do that for sure.
Well, if you were using this, right, and I assume what was this law?
Well, wait, hang on. So
I know
you agree that Eisenhower could be breaking the law, right?
Eisenhower could be breaking the law, but I never heard that he has, so I would assume he hasn't.
So Little Rock Crisis is Dwight D. Eisenhower invoked the Insurrection Act.
He did? Okay.
1957, September 23rd. He invoked the Insurrection Act. He federalized the Arkansas National Guard after he invoked the Insurrection Act. Because Arkansas was not listening. So you agree that, based on your reading of that statute, that it's likely that Trump is violating the law by not issuing the orders to the governors, correct?
Through my layman understanding, I mean, we're both not practicing lawyers, right? I mean,
I am a lawyer, but I'm no longer in practice currently.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, it seems likely based on my, because you say likely, right? Likely, but I mean, he's got a lot of lawyers. He's clearly had legal advisement. Clearly they don't want him to break the law. And this is the argument I was getting.
Okay, so what can I show you?
Right?
Like, if what you're saying is anytime I can show you like the plain language of a statute violates of what he's doing, if you're just gonna say, well, he has lawyers and I don't know, so I can never show you. I can never provide anything that would show you that he's breaking the law, right? Because he has lawyers.
I mean, I got to answer no to that, right? Or else I look like a hack.
You look like a hack if you say
no.
I can never show it. Yeah. So what's stopping you? Just that he has lawyers is stopping you from saying that this is probably illegal?
Okay. Well, I mean, like if I'm really picking at the corners here, I'm going to look at like through, right? And it's like, it seems a little bit perfunctory, like
what's perfunctory about it?
Through, but because it's like through the governor. So it's like, the governor's not even the guy, you know, coming up, or the woman coming up with like the orders here, right? It's just like
So
he's just being kind of, you know,
so
passed
what?
through.
Yeah, but it says it though. It says it. It says that the governors were the ones issuing the orders.
Issued through.
Yeah, issued through the governors. The governors are the ones who are implementing part of the federal. Why do you think that that's there?
Wait, so are these orders even going to the guardsmen? It's not clear because it's just saying orders for these
I asked a
purposes
question
shall
and I
be
didn't hear an
issued.
answer. Why do you think that? I asked a question, I didn't hear an answer. So
I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah. So
Okay.
so what I
I mean,
asked
I
was
asked a question.
why? Okay, what question did you ask? I'll answer your question first.
Okay, thank you. So orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states. Are these orders to the guardsmen? It's unclear.
It says orders for the purposes of this nationalization shall be issued through the governors.
I don't see that. I don't see that.
No, but that's the purpose of the statute, is for anything related to the statute, that the orders to these units shall be issued through the governors. But no matter what, none of this was done in coordination with the governor. So I don't understand why you won't answer now. My question is, do you agree that, or sorry, what do you think the purpose of this was, to have that proviso that the orders have to be issued through the governors?
Okay, so what was the purpose and why did they put it
The
there?
purpose
it could
are
just
when the
be,
United States and the Commonwealth
language
possess-
that's doing nothing.
Language that's doing nothing. So when it says orders for these purposes,
Yep.
shall, you understand shall is mandatory, right? Mandatory? Shall is mandatory?
You say, hey,
It shall be done, right? So shall is not it's not optional, right? Shall is mandatory. Do you agree it's mandatory?
no.
So if someone says you
Yes,
shall,
yeah, I agree. It's mandatory. I agree. Yeah.
So it's not. So when the law says it shall be done through something, you think that that's like you could ignore it?
Well, that's not what I said.
So you can't ignore it, right?
Maybe it's not even doing anything.
What do you mean it's not doing something? Why?
ignore
Why
it.
would they have a whole sentence that doesn't do anything like that?
Sloppy, lazy. I don't know.
Why would you assume that the law that says shall and has a mandatory provision that it's sloppy to include that, or it's why would you assume that it's not there doing anything?
I mean, I'm not assuming it. I mean, it's your burden to show that it's doing something, right?
Well, my burden for showing that it means something is it was passed by Congress. It says what must happen. It specifies how something is to be done, and under normal principles, when we look at a law that, for example, says nobody shall do something or someone shall do something, we assume that in the main that those laws were intended to have an effect, not to have no effect. I assume that when Congress passes a law, they're intending to do something, not to do nothing.
Fair enough, but like, how does this get past? You know, like White House counsel. How's White House counsel looking at this?
Because they're
and being
all
like,
fucking
yeah.
loser scum who are sycophants to Trump. But that doesn't answer that. The point is, by that logic, presidents can never do anything illegal because they always have White House counsel.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, it's not anything meant to prove that, you know, it's not illegal. It's just, you know, evidence to the contrary that what he's doing is not illegal.
The fact that he has lawyers, would you ever say this about like any criminal? Well, he has lawyers.
Well, yeah, no, it's definitely evidence to the contrary that what he's doing is not illegal. That he's
The
gone
fact
and
that someone
sold
has
lawyers.
lawyers.
Yeah, it's not conclusive evidence. It's evidence.
Okay.
It's ticking up the likely. You agree?
I don't know if
great.
I agree with that. I think that that's kind of silly. I think that whether something is legal depends on like the argument for its legality. So if you go to the White House counsel, or if you go to, you know, the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice for some purpose, I'm going to see what the OLC says, or I'm going to see what White House counsel says. I'm going to like read their argument, but I'm not going to assume that just because the lawyer for the president says something's legal, that I'm not going to give them points that it is legal because their own lawyers say it is.
Sure, I'm speaking in matter of probabilities. I'm not speaking in, you know, like binary truth. Is it legal? Is it not legal? I'm just saying.
So the fact that a lawyer is arguing something is legal for you is evidence that it in fact is legal?
It's definitely evidence, yeah.
Okay. How much would you give the weight that someone has a lawyer arguing for a position?
Depends on the lawyer. Depends on the lawyer, right?
Okay.
Does it not?
You think that's a little silly?
That a lawyer saying something is legal is evidence that it is legal?
Yeah, I think that's silly.
No, no, I don't think that's silly at all.
I think
I
that
mean,
whether or not
if I were to consult
it
you
depends
as a
on
lawyer,
the
right?
it depends on the lawyer's argument.
Depends. Yeah, but I'm not. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not appraised to judge the lawyer's argument.
Okay, so you're just saying that you can never say something is legal or illegal because you're not a lawyer.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that in general, I'm not appraised to judge the lawyer's argument. That's why we have lawyers.
Okay, so when I'm a lawyer, I'm telling you that this is illegal. Why don't you believe me?
Well, now I'm hearing two stories. It's like I don't know.
You think it's legal to like steal from a nursery?
No,
Wait, you're not a
stealing
lawyer.
is legal.
Okay, well, not issuing orders through the governors under 10 USC 12406 is illegal.
Yeah, but this is a conflation because this is complex language and that is just stealing, which is
This is complex for you.
everyone
That
understands to be illegal.
orders for these purposes, the purposes being the United States or
I've
any
seen a lot of
Commonwealth under
comments, yeah.
or possessions invaded in danger of invasion, that there's a rebellion or danger of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, or the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, that the orders for those purposes be issued through the governors of the states. You think that is so complicated that you can't possibly divine whether or not. So nothing I could give you. So even if Trump said, I am not issuing orders through the governors of the states, would you say that's illegal if he even said that literal phraseology?
Well, first of all, how do we know he's not
Wait, I'm asking you a question.
issuing orders through?
If he, well, you granted that at the start, but if he literally said,
Okay.
orders for these purposes shall not be issued through the government of the states, if Trump said that as he was giving this order, would you say he's violating the law at that point?
Well, I mean, it's difficult because like he's
So
kind
he
of a
could
liar,
literally
so, like,
say, he could literally say, we are not issuing orders through the governors for purposes of this invocation. And you would say, yeah, we don't know if he's violating the law.
well, what if he is?
Well,
What
he's
if he is
not.
in fact issuing orders through the
But we know
governors,
he's
but
not
he
because
says he is?
because Newsom is suing and saying that we need to, that he has no control and he's not issuing orders. We know he's not. Newsom is saying they're not.
Okay. And
So therefore he's not in compliance.
well, okay, look, I mean, like he's compliant with like would you argue? I'd say it's arguably two, right? And then it's definitely three as far as like the list
Wait.
here.
There's a rebellion?
Um, sorry, danger of a rebellion.
Okay. What's a rebellion?
Danger of a rebellion.
Yeah. What's a rebellion?
What's a rebel? I don't know what a rebellion.
So how do you know how do you know that we're definitely in danger of a rebellion if you don't know what a rebellion is?
How do I know we're definitely in danger? Okay, first of all, you gotta grant me three. Okay, but if we're just sticking on two,
Well, Trump has said that this is a rebellion. Trump has said it's a rebellion.
okay, well, say it or not, three is still a thing. But two, how do I know there's a danger rebellion? I mean, like that's really broad, right?
Well, you don't even know what a rebellion is. You just said so. You don't know too, right?
I have a general idea of what a rebellion is.
So what's your general idea of what a
I
rebellion
mean,
is?
I don't know what the exact legal term. Okay, let's say taking up arms against the taking up arms. That's but I'm trying to be clinical in my language here. Using force, conspiracy against the, like, when you try to overthrow the government or you try to, hurt them.
You tried to. So are the ICE protesters trying to overthrow the government?
Are they trying to overthrow the government? Who the fuck? Probably some of them, yeah. I mean, like that guy you had here, two back, sounds like he'd be partial to that. Anarchist,
So you agree?
right?
So you agree? Jan 6 is
Isn't
a rebellion, right?
Do I agree that Jan 6 was a rebellion? Let's just stick on the topic.
Wait.
Here, okay?
I just want to make sure you're consistent. So do you agree Jan 6 is a rebellion? Under what you just said?
Look, I think you won't do anything to talk about anything.
No,
other than this,
I
right?
literally
So,
will just move on. But I just want you to grant, based on your definition of rebellion, that Jan 6 was a rebellion, right?
I don't get into all the facts.
Wait. So you're unable to say whether Jan 6 is a rebellion, but you think that it's probable this is a rebellion?
No, I never said that. Danger of a rebellion.
Okay, so is there danger of rebellion for Jan 6?
Was there danger? Sure, there was danger of rebellion.
Okay, cool.
Or you can make a colorable legal argument that there was danger of rebellion.
Wait, you don't provide
Either
that
one.
proviso for this though. You don't say you can make a colorable legal argument. Colorable legal argument. You can make colorable
Sure,
legal
you can make
argument
a
for a
colorable
law.
legal argument.
Yeah, but you say that
Yep.
we are in danger of rebellion in the ICE protest case, but you don't say that for Jan 6. You say you can make a colorable legal argument for Jan 6, not that we are actually in danger.
All right, let's just get off Jan 6.
Yeah, because you don't like
I
it
think you wanna
because you guys
describe-
are inconsistent. You guys are inconsistent, and your definitions you don't apply consistently. That's why you want to get off it. But yeah, fine. Let's go number 3. President is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Okay, even grant that that's the case. Even grant that that's the case. What does that have to do with that the order shall be issued to the governors of the states?
Oh, you're really sticking on that. Look, I mean, like he's got bang,
Well,
bang. All right.
That's my basis to say it's illegal, right?
That's-
That's the basis to say it's illegal. And that's what you started with. You started with that, right? You started by asking me whether it's legal, and so now we're just taking it forward. And now that you're uncomfortable with the basis of its illegality, now that you don't want to talk about it anymore.
No, I'm fine to talk about it.
So, do you think
Yeah.
that? So, I'll ask you again. Do you think that Trump is issuing orders to the governors of the states for the purposes of number 3?
I think that he's issuing orders through the governors
Why is this hard? He's not
of
doing
the
it.
states.
He's not working with Gavin Newsom, and Gavin Newsom is not issuing orders on behalf of the president. They're just not. The secretary. It's very clear in the order that he posted that he says the Secretary of Defense is taking control. He's not issuing it through the governor. It's very clear. Why is this hard?
The president in these matters has a lot of broad discretion and authority.
Sorry, I'm focusing on one thing that you're trying to dodge. You agree he's not issuing orders to Gavin Newsom, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's not in compliance with that mandatory provision of that law, correct? Where it says shall.
Shall, yeah, you're sticking on the shall thing. Shall be issued through the governors of the states.
And he's not doing that, right?
I mean, yeah, it would seem he's not.
Okay, so he's not in compliance with that provision of the law, correct?
As I understand it, yeah.
Okay, so that's why I think it's illegal.
Okay, but all right. It seems that you granted 3, all right, and
I mean, I don't
you
know
moved
about
on
that.
from 2. I mean, you never really granted 2. You kind of ran away from
Well,
it.
no, I don't.
But, that's neither here nor there.
I don't grant 2. I don't grant 2.
Okay, danger of a rebellion.
Yeah, I don't
You don't
grant
think
2.
there's danger of rebellion?
No, I don't.
That's so broad. How could you not grant that?
Well, because I don't think there's a danger of rebellion. That's why I don't grant that.
Wait, so it's not just like. So does that have to be a danger of rebellion in fact, or a danger of rebellion as the president sees it?
Well, you're asking me. Well, I don't know if I can. You're asking me basically, am I bound by the president's determination that there is a rebellion? Me personally, I'm not bound by that, right? If the
Sure, you're not bound by it. I'm saying
if
the
Biden
law,
said
the
if
law.
Biden said that there's a rebellion because of these truck driver protests or something, would you be bound by that determination? Now I don't know. Like, the question is, like, can the president be wrong about whether there's a danger of a rebellion? The answer is, of course, he can be, actually and factually. Now, there's a separate question about whether anyone can undermine his determination, but you didn't ask me that. You asked me whether or not I thought there was a danger of rebellion or a rebellion. And my answer is no, I don't think so. Well, I have no reason to believe it, I should say. I have no reason to believe that there is.
Okay, well,
evidence
what's the bar of danger? Well, like, what is danger? I mean, like, is there like a 1 in 1,000 chance? Like what
It doesn't specify.
danger It doesn't specify, so it could just be 1 in 5,000, right? It could
Okay,
be
then
1 in
then
10,000.
my interpretation of danger of rebellion is 1 in 1 trillion, and so we're always in a state of danger of rebellion.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Okay.
true, but you have to draw the line somewhere, and so there has to be a number. And so where's the
So
line?
my number, whatever number mine is, I'm not going to give you a specific percentage. There's some amount of of significance of a danger where it hasn't met my personal threshold for that. If that's what you're asking me, and that's that is what you asked me.
Yep.
So for me, danger
Ask for a
rebellion
number.
probably between.
You're avoiding the question.
Wait. Sorry, you just cut out. What'd you say?
I said ask for a number.
Yeah, so me personally, I would say danger of rebellion anywhere from probably at the lowest end 3 to 5%.
3 to 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's got to be lower. It's got to be lower than that.
Okay, but you asked me. You asked me.
3 to 5%.
You asked me.
Okay, well, it's a big country. 3 to 5% of the time, you could have an actual full-on rebellion on your hands, right?
A lot of rebellions
You know,
lately. Have there been a
you
lot of
run that-
rebellions
you run
lately?
that simulation?
When's the last rebellion we've had?
When's the last rebellion we had? It's got a. I don't know, but if you would just allow me to finish the point instead of jumping on the point you thought I was going to make, that'd be great. I was saying, right, if you run this 3 to 5% rebellion chance, this law has no teeth because, you're going to have a rebellion on your hands.
You're asking me personally what I consider danger of rebellion.
3 times out of 100.
I
3
gave
times out of
you a
100.
range.
Yeah.
I gave you a range. So I answered your question.
Danger could be 3 to 5.
That's my.
Okay,
You're
give me the
you're
range.
asking me.
It's just
Yeah.
not satisfactory.
So your range is what is your range?
Let's say 1 in 1,000.
1 in 1,000.
1 in 1,000.
Okay, I think that's too
The rebellion
low.
would be really bad.
I
A
agree.
rebellion would be really bad, right?
But
Do we agree?
I take
Do we
yeah.
do we agree? Do we agree?
I think we do agree.
Okay.
But I think that these are awesome authorities, and I think that what you're saying is way too low. But
No,
I don't
think I'm
believe.
right in this.
But to be clear, I don't believe that we're 1,000th gonna you roll the dice, and you have 1,000 different instances. I don't think that it meets even your threshold. We're not close to a rebellion at all. We're not even 1/1,000.
Really?
No.
Really?
Yeah, really.
You got people, they're lighting cars on fire. They're looting buildings.
Oh my God.
They're assaulting these officers. They're in large numbers. They're massing under a foreign flag. I don't know.
So you think that there's a
I don't know.
1
Definitely-
in 1,000
definitely,
chance
hey,
that we're
look.
going to have an outright rebellion on the basis of this?
Let me say it like this. There's been 4 callers. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
One guy, he seemed pretty sympathetic to rebellion,
Yeah, but he's not supported
Yeah.
by. So Newsom doesn't support that, the acts of violence. The LA people in charge don't support that violence. The Democrats don't support that violence. Regular people don't support that violence. And
Allegedly.
So there's no danger of this breaking out into a general rebellion.
Well, you don't need a lot of people to, you don't need, how many people do you need to start a rebellion? Not that many.
Okay, but I think you need.
How many people do you need to start a rebellion?
So-
You seem to be saying, wait, do you think J6 was a rebellion?
Yeah, I do.
You do? How many people were there?
Something like.
Were they regular people?
You mean
Were they regular people?
You mean the general? You mean the general amount of people in Washington D.C. that day, or do you mean the people who were engaged?
You don't think there's a 1 in
Whoa!
1,000 chance?
Wait a
You don't
second.
think there's a 1 in 1,000 chance you can get a J6
Wait a second.
event?
Wait a second.
A J6
Wait a second.
to be born out of this?
Wait a second. You asked me whether I thought J6 was a rebellion. I answered yes.
I did.
do.
You said yes.
I
You
do
did
believe it's
say
a rebellion.
yes.
You didn't ask me what I take to be the definition of rebellion. And so just because there's a J6 style event someplace doesn't mean it's a rebellion. I take a rebellion to be a concerted insurrection. It's a type of insurrection that either is prolonged in its nature, so it's either time delimited, or it has as its aim the unseating of the government. So that's what I take to be a rebellion. Is it's a form of insurrection that has more specific aims, to unseat the government, or it's prolonged in time, So that's and that
Prolonged
again. So again, so we're gonna do these sorties paradox. Excuse me. So we're gonna do these sorties paradoxes. Where you're going to say, where's the exact line? Yeah, I do think that Chaz is probably rebellion. So I bite these bullets all the time. I think that it's prolonged enough to be as an insurrection. But I am specific about what I mean. I am specific. Whoa. Wait.
In this fucking decade, according to you.
Yes. So just to be a trillion% clear. Well, in that case, I don't think it's a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States necessarily. I think it's potentially a rebellion against the government of Washington D.C. But even in that case, I'm not even granted too much because shut the fuck up. Let me finish. So it was a withdrawal from the government from a given area, and they essentially were like working with them and trying to simmer down tensions. But even just put that aside, what's your definition of rebellion?
I mean, you heard me.
What's your definition of rebellion? What's your definition of rebellion?
I haven't come up with a good one in the intervening.
So when you say that there's a 1 in 1,000 chance of rebellion of this event, how can you possibly know that we are reaching that threshold if you don't know what a rebellion is?
Well, for the purpose of answering this question, I'll just opt for your definition of rebellion.
So you agree that Jan 6 is a rebellion?
We had him in Chaz.
So you agree Jan 6
for purposes of answering these questions.
Wait, so do you? So I'll ask you. For answering. So is it your opinion that Chaz was a rebellion?
Is it my opinion that Chaz? And what you're going to try to get me to say? Oh, since Chaz is a rebellion, then J6 has to be.
Well, you know this is going right. Yeah. So yeah.
Do I think Chaz is a rebellion? I think you seem to think it was, and
Not what I asked, dipshit. Not what I asked.
Okay. Well then, do I think it's a rebellion? In my considered opinion, really digging into all the legal argumentation about what is a rebellion, what's not a rebellion. Sure, it's a rebellion.
Okay, so you agree Jan 6 is a rebellion, right?
Oh my. This guy, is there anything you could think about other than Jan 6?
Well, why don't you answer the fucking question? People are accusing me of being inconsistent. I'm being consistent. I'm answering the questions, and the people who are accusing me of inconsistency aren't being consistent. So would you kindly tell me if Jan 6 is a rebellion?
I'm not being inconsistent. I'm not giving an answer. Like, that's not inconsistency. That's omission.
So you refuse to answer that?
I mean, I don't have a good definition of rebellion.
Doesn't that concern you? Then if you don't have a good definition, why you say Chaz is a rebellion?
I said you seem to think it is.
No, I'm asking you. Do you think Chaz is a rebellion? You said yes. And so then I asked you, do you think Jan 6 is a rebellion? And now you're waffling.
I don't think I'm waffling. I think you're just really interested in this Jan 6 shit, which happened
So I'm asking, are you willing to answer that question? You were willing to answer the Chaz one. That was longer ago than Jan 6.
I think they were mostly peaceful. I think mostly peaceful.
So I understand, but you were willing to answer the Jan 6 question. Sorry, the Chaz question. Why aren't you willing to answer the Jan 6 one?
Why am I not willing to answer the Jan 6 one?
Mm-hmm.
I'm repeating the question. I don't want to hazard an opinion on stuff that I don't know a lot about.
But you answered about Chaz.
That sounds prudent.
Well, you answered about Chaz. You did answer
anything about Chaz.
No, you said that you said it was a rebellion. Expert. But why aren't you willing to say that about Jan 6?
I don't know that much about Jan 6.
Dude, you're such a fucking weasel.
Rude. Okay, but
so
let's just get
back
on the point
you
here.
understand where the logic of of what you're saying goes, and you don't want to reach that logic because you don't want to say that Jan 6 was a rebellion. Now look at me. I'm being consistent.
Do you think there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that you could get some Chaz-like event coming out of this? Because let's just get back to point 2 here, right? List number 2, subsection 2. I don't know what.
No, I don't think this. No, I don't think. No, I don't think that there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that we have a Chaz-like event.
Really. Have libs gotten more mad or less mad since then?
I
Just
don't know
in
what
general,
that
in your
I don't know what that
Pennsylvania,
matters.
you would know,
You asked
right?
me a question. You asked me a question. But
I've
I
leftists
want to
gone
stick to
more
this.
mad. Well,
I
why would
want
that matter
to
is why
stick
that
to
would
this.
matter.
I
Why
want
that
to
would
stick.
matter.
I want to stick to
Let
this.
me answer your question.
I want to stick to this. So my question, to be clear, is about Jan 6, and you're saying I want to be clear. You're unwilling to answer any question about Jan 6
Oh my
because you
God.
quote don't know anything
This
about
guy.
it.
This guy. I didn't say I don't know anything about it. I just said I know more about Chaz than I do about,
Really?
Jan 6.
Can you name any person involved in the Chaz
Yeah, really.
stuff? And any person involved in it?
By name?
Yeah, without Googling. Do you know where Chaz took place? What state?
Stuck in Washington State.
Okay.
Seattle.
Okay. So whereabouts was Chaz?
Seattle?
Okay. How many people were involved in Chaz?
It was variable depending on the time.
Variable depending on time. How many people were involved in Jan 6?
It depends how you draw the circle.
Okay,
Concentric
but you know roughly, right? Like there's several thousand in the restricted area and tens of thousands behind it, right? You knew that, right?
Yeah, I don't know why these,
You know more about Jan 6 and
questions of
Chaz.
fact
Come on,
are
you know
important to-
because the truth is you actually do know more about Jan 6 and Chaz. You know the people involved. You know the names of some of the rioters. You know what
How
occurred.
could you
You've seen
claim
more
to know
video.
what I know? How could you claim to
No,
know
because
what I know?
you're bullshitting. And you know it. Because you're bullshitting. You know it. Okay. Okay. So what do we?
Okay,
so
now
you
can we just
agree
get
that?
back to
Yeah.
danger or rebellion?
Okay.
You
Yeah.
don't think there's a 1 in 1,000 chance of a Chaz-like event? And I was
No,
getting
I
on to the
don't. I
point
answered it.
of-
Wait, you just repeated the question. I answered it already, and I'm answering it the same way.
You answered it, and
Yeah.
now I'm going to ask a further question.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Which is, have leftists gotten more or less mad since that time?
I don't know.
I think, are you?
I don't know.
You
I haven't seen the polling. I haven't seen the polling. I don't know. I think people were more animated right after.
You haven't seen the are they mad polling? Just how about you just gauge the vibes?
No,
hazard a
I don't
guess.
know. My
Hazard
guess
a
is
guess.
my
Why
guess is that
not?
people were more mad about.
now
but-
who's-
but hang on,
how- now who's Mr.
whoa.
I'm
So
not
the
answering.
answer is no. I'm answering you. I said I don't know. I did answer you, right?
Don't know.
I don't
did
know
answer.
whether leftists and
I don't
I
know.
also don't know what you mean by
know if,
leftists. You mean
Jan 6 was insurrection.
you don't know whether? Yeah, I mean that's fine. You can say I don't know, but the truth is you know enough in the context of Chaz to call it a rebellion, and you know more about Jan 6 than you do about Chaz. And the truth is, I actually haven't seen the polling, and I don't know what you mean when you say leftist. You mean Democrats, or do you mean like communist anarchist? And I don't know the polling. I literally don't know the polling.
Do you need polling for this?
Yeah, I think you do need polling. How else would you get a sense of whether people are more mad?
I don't know. Exists in the world, vibes,
Yeah.
Gauge, are you mad? Are you more mad? Are you more mad since, because of, Trump? Is he making you mad? I think he is, right?
Well, so me personally, I'm more mad, but you didn't ask that.
Oh, well, do you think that your, anger level may be indicative of,
It
how
may be,
mad
but
leftists are at any given
it
time?
may be, but I don't take my opinion to be representative. I think I'm a very unique person.
I don't think you're that unique. Like, I think, you and a lot of other people are very mad, and that's why you've all gone out into the street and you've
Yeah, but
started,
yours is a
burning the
comparison
Waymos
question.
and-
Yours is a comparison question at a time when Trump's popularity is actually higher than when it was in his first term, where there was more anger at Trump after his first
That's just
election
about
victory.
independence. That does, they're
Okay, but I don't know.
I'm talking about, the real
I'm telling you,
sickos.
I haven't seen the polling on the level of madness about leftists or Democrats in general. I'm telling you, I don't know that. And also, even if they were mad, more mad than before, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a 1 in 1,000 chance of a Chaz-like event. So they don't even necessarily follow.
Really? I mean, like, they're doing civil unrest. I mean, it's the hot months of the year, right? Like, come on. They surrounded a federal building. They surrounded a law enforcement building, right?
Is that what
ICE
Chaz
facility.
was? Is that what Chaz is broader than that? Chaz was
Sorry, excuse. That wasn't what Chaz was, but that was what. Well, yeah, Chaz was broader than that, but it included attacks on law enforcement facilities. So there's that similarity right there.
So Gavin Newsom
Chaz was broader than
so if you want my
I'm not
actual
saying it's Chaz right now.
if you want my actual opinion, it's that Gavin Newsom has aspirations. He wants to run for national office, and we've learned from the Chaz experience, and he's not going to abide by any kind of Chaz situation in his state. That's why I think that the people now do not want to be seen as abiding by a Chaz-like situation, because they learned the history of Chaz, and so they're not stupid enough when they have these kinds of ambitions to let that happen again. They know it was unpopular, and so that's the answer.
So now we got to guess the Gavin Newsom state of mind as to determine,
Yeah,
is
I
there
know
a
that. Wait, no,
1,000 chance?
dude, are you shitting me? Like, so I can't take a f***ing inference based on my perception. But so what? This is literally what you're saying, right?
We gotta
I just want to say this is what you're literally saying. You're saying I can make an inference and I can make an assumption that people share my level of madness, but I can't make a kind of inference or good faith interpretation of my of Gavin Newsom's political ambitions and read the tea leaves vis-a-vis what these administration officials are saying, what they're talking about in terms of violations of law, and their general attitude towards protests in the past. You're telling me I can make an assumption that my level of madness is reflective of the general Democrat or lefty, but I can't make an assumption based on my, the words that Gavin Newsom is saying and his political ambitions. I can't do that.
Look, I mean, if you're this committed to, as you say, reading the tea leaves, I'd say go at it. But back on around reality, I'd say we had a Chaz event in a Democrat state a few years back, during Trump's term. Doesn't want it to fucking happen again, so he sends in the guard. All right, that's what I think. I think let's not, all throw in all our chips, throw in, the rest of the city of Los Angeles that hasn't burned down, right? On the basis of, is Gavin Newsom going to do the right thing? Because I don't think that's
But you agree that Trump is violating the law vis-a-vis the orders to the governors, right?
Orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states. Or, I mean, I don't know if that's really an important sentence.
No, but I'm not asking if it's important. I'm asking, do you think he's violating it?
Yeah, it would seem that he's violating that sentence of the law.
Do you care that he's violating the law?
I mean, yeah, no. I mean, like, we're a country of laws, not, we're a nation of laws, not men.
So do you think he should be violating the law?
No, he shouldn't be violating the law.
Okay,
I don't think he is.
Well, you just said he is.
Well, I think he has counsel, and I don't want to rehash all arguments that we made.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't want to.
So you're cooked, but okay, continue.
Well, I said I don't want to rehash all the arguments that were made, but and
there's a contradiction.
I think you just want to get off this danger of rebellion point.
Well, no, we've just talked about it, and I just told you I don't agree. How am I getting off of it?
Oh, well, you first of all, you changed the subject. You're like, well, in summation, right? You agree that he's violent.
No, you did that. Sorry, you did that first because you said, I just think that he's going over there to stop a Chaz-like situation. That's changing the conversation about whether a Chaz-like situation is likely into what you think the intentions are of Trump. And so you changed the conversation first. Agreed?
Well, no, I was still on the point of danger of rebellion.
You got into Trump's intentions. You got into Trump's intentions about why he's doing something, which is different than like the actual chance of this emerging into a Chaz-like situation. Is the you were talking about
still on danger of rebellion,
and also
totally on danger of rebellion.
Also, just to be clear, no. So it's a different conversation. We were talking about the actual chance of a danger of rebellion, and you're talking now about what Trump is trying to prevent. It's different. Agreed. It's different. What Trump is going to do in response, why Trump is doing something in response to a danger is different than whether or not a danger exists. Agreed?
Why Trump is doing something in response to it is different. Can you repeat that?
So the rationale behind Trump's actions in response to a perceived danger is different than whether that danger exists or not. Correct? Those are different conversations?
Yeah, that's a different conversation.
Okay, so you change the subject first. And also, just so you're aware, Trump has said that it is a rebellion already. He's not just saying it's a danger rebellion. So you disagree with Trump that there's a rebellion, right?
I never said there wasn't a rebellion.
Wait, so do you agree or disagree with Trump that there is a rebellion?
It's a much easier, it's a much lower bar to clear.
I understand, but I just want to be clear. Do you agree with Trump?
Trump says a lot of things.
Wait, I'm asking if you agree with Trump that there is a rebellion right now.
In the hearts of many, sure, yeah. I mean,
no. I'm asking. I'm not asking in the hearts of many. I'm asking you. Do you think that there's a rebellion right now? Do you agree with Trump that there's a rebellion?
Look, if that's his determination, he has access to more facts.
I'm asking whether you agree. Do you have enough reason to agree with him?
From what I've seen?
Yeah.
Well, look, funny thing, right? I mean, you said prolonged, whatever the fuck, right? So if we're at the beginning of this and this continues and this blossoms into whatever the fuck,
You're
you know,
dodging, and
as
everyone
you
knows
guys
you're
are saying,
dodging. I'm not stupid. You're dodging. The question is,
just
do you?
let me
Yeah.
let me
I know,
get
but I
to
know
it.
you're dodging. I'm just
All
going to
right?
ask you the same question, but go ahead.
Okay, well, I'd appreciate if you'd ask the question. Okay, well, I'll just get to it. All right, so if this goes on as a prolonged thing, as you say, prolonged period of time, I don't know what the exact language used was, but let's just say it goes on like that. If we're in the early days of something, then, you know, hey, it would be retrospective, but you can only say it retrospectively, but sure.
Wait, so my question for you is, do you even remember my question?
Yeah, you said, are we in a rebellion?
Yeah, right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we in
We-
rebellion right now?
Are we?
I mean, that would we would need to know the future to say.
Wait, why would we need to know the future to know if we're in rebellion right now?
Well, as you said, right, a prolonged insurrection or something like that for a prolonged period of time. And so if this were to continue, if this were to blossom into
Once
something,
it is prolonged, it's a
as-
rebellion, but before then, it's not.
well, no, because then it's the start of the thing, right? I mean, how do you draw the time when you're looking back at it?
Yeah. So
Because
let me ask. So I understand what you're saying. I disagree. I think that if the aim is a particular aim, and once it becomes prolonged, I think at the time that it's prolonged, that's when it becomes a rebellion. And before then, it's not a rebellion. Now, what prolonged is, I can't give you a specific definition on that, but even just put that aside and let's just assume that, okay, let's say that retroactively you can determine something is a rebellion even before that. Are we at the stage yet? Do you have any information to agree at this point that we're in a rebellion? Because Trump has said right now we're in a rebellion. So do you agree with his determination as of now that we're in a rebellion?
well, first of all, we don't even know that he's speaking in terms of that. He
I'm
means
asking
the
you a
legal
question.
term
What did I just ask you?
rebellion when
You're
he says
dodging.
rebellion.
Stop dodging.
I'm not dodging. It's just you're expecting him to use this I'm going to say it for like the ninth time in the conversation, legal term of art, because it's like a term I've heard, and so I want to say it. But
So do you agree with Trump or not?
why can't you just be talking in the colloquial sense?
So I'm asking you whether you agree or not with him.
Why can't he just be using poetic language? Do I agree with him? If he's using poetic language, then definitely, you know.
This is the cult working around your brain. So anytime he says something, you're not going to impose some significance
Oh my
of it,
God.
even if he's invoking legal authorities based on legal definitions.
Everyone's in a cult.
He's invoking this act on the basis of a legal determination that there's a rebellion, and you're saying he could be speaking poetically.
No, he's not. It's this executive order where he invokes his act say that there's a rebellion.
Literally, it
Is there?
does. Literally, it does.
Really, in that executive order.
Yes.
The EO.
Yes. You want to look at it?
Really. Please. Where is it? How do I find it?
I'm reading it from you right now. Numerous incidents of violence and disorder have recently occurred and threaten to continue in response to the enforcement of federal law by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and other U.S. government personnel who are performing federal functions and supporting the faithful execution of federal immigration law. In addition, violent protests threaten the security of and significant damage to federal immigration detention facilities and other federal properties. To the extent that protests or acts of violence directly inhibit the execution of laws, they constitute a form of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States.
To the extent that protesters' activities curtail the whatever the something law they constitute a rebellion in the United States.
Yeah, so you agree that he's saying it's a rebellion, right?
I don't think in there was a definitive statement that there's a rebellion.
Well, do you agree that protests or acts of violence are directly inhibiting the execution of laws in California, and that he's invoking this law that refers to rebellions?
Well, he's also talking about. The law also refers to they can't enforce the law, and he's talking about them not being able to enforce the law.
Oh my fucking God, dude! So when
It
you say
seems like- it seems like he's honing in on
when he
points
says
2 and
they
3 like
constitute
me.
a form of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, is he speaking poetically? Do you think in this order?
No, I think he's, introducing the.
So he's not speaking poetically, right?
Introducing point two.
So he's not speaking.
Introducing point two. And by the way, he doesn't have to be right in as far as.
Okay, so I'm asking you. So
that could just be.
So when he says it's a
Just because you
rebellion,
make an argument doesn't mean you believe it.
so when he says a rebellion,
another point.
by the way, there are other places in public statements that he said it's a rebellion. But when he says it's a rebellion, you don't think he's speaking poetically,
those
right?
aren't,
you don't think he's speaking
formal.
poetically, right? You don't think he's speaking poetically, right? You think he's invoking something specific
I think
related to legal authority, right?
I think in that executive order, I think what he's doing is he's opening the door, saying, "I want to argue on point two."
So,
as well as point three."
my! So you think that? Do you think that Trump is saying and believes that this is a rebellion?
Insofar as Trump has a notion of what a rebellion is,
Yes, right.
yeah, I mean, like it seems like people are okay. Look, if I'm Trump, right, and I'm,
I'm not asking
I'm
you
trying
for
to
your.
do
No. Sorry. I'm just asking you
You're
for a
asking me
yes
what
or
Trump
no.
believes.
I'm
You're
just asking
asking
for
what
a
Trump
yes or no.
believes.
I'm just
You're
asking you
asking
for a
what
yes or no.
Trump
I'm asking you what he says and what do you think he believes. I'm asking both. And so I want you to answer that, and you don't need to give
I'm
some
trying to give you that.
exposition.
I'm trying to give you that.
Just tell me what your response is.
I do need to give you some exposition because that's my response, and that's how I come to a state of mind.
Okay,
all
go.
right? So,
Ramble. Go.
all right. Yeah, so if I'm Trump and I'm trying to, do the deportations or the fuck, and people are, they're coming at these ICE buildings and they're trying to, assault my police officers. They're trying to stop the execution of the law or whatever the hell with force, violent force. I think that's a rebellion. But again, I'm not a lawyer. Trump's not a lawyer. So, maybe he's got this idea in his head that, it's a fucking rebellion. I mean, he's been hearing rebellion ever since Jan 6, that thing you guys don't stop talking about. It's probably a meme in his head and it's bouncing around and he thinks, this is a rebellion.
So do you think, I'll ask again, do you think that Trump is sane and believes that this is a rebellion?
Well, what do you mean by rebellion?
I'm not asking you that question. You're asking me a question.
What?
I'm asking you a question, right? And so you just asked me a question that's not an answer.
Well, what do you mean by rebellion?
That's a question. That's not answering what I'm saying.
Well, I'd have to know what you mean by rebellion to answer if I think he believes that it's a rebellion.
I'm sorry. So why would I need to clarify what I mean? How does that help answer the question?
Well, the reason why you need to clarify what you mean is because I don't know what you mean when you say rebellion. Do you mean in the colloquial sense? Do you mean in the legal term of art sense?
I'm using whatever sense that Trump means when he uses rebellion.
Whatever sense Trump means when he uses a rebellion. Well, I mean, if he's using it, probably. Although sometimes he lies.
Okay,
so
so
maybe
wait,
not. Like I don't know.
So can you give a straight answer? Is the answer probably he thinks that there's a rebellion and is saying it so?
Is that unreasonable to think that he probably thinks there's a
No,
rebellion?
I think that is reasonable and that's correct and that's what the evidence shows.
Yeah, but now you want to equivocate
agree with
between, maybe he thinks that colloquially, but he doesn't think that in legal term of art insofar that he thinks about legal shit.
Well, no. You just agreed that he probably thinks that it's a rebellion.
That is what I just agreed to. What's your point?
Okay, so do you agree with him?
Well, I agree with him.
Yeah.
Colloquially, do I think it's a
Not colloquially.
yeah,
What,
yeah, I'd say so.
So is Jan 6 a rebellion?
Well, then that's not agreeing
So is
with
Jan
him,
6 a rebellion?
because I
So is
don't know
Jan
if
6 a
he's-
rebellion? So is Jan 6 a rebellion?
Holy shit! Why with the Jan 6? What's so great about Jan 6?
Be consistent. Be
This happened,
consistent.
like, what?
Be consistent. Be consistent.
Yeah, I'm being consistent in that I'm not answering that fucking question. All right. So
Why?
let's just
Why?
get
Because
to
it
the next
shatters
point.
you. Because it shatters you.
Yeah.
Why can't you just be?
shattered, all right?
Yeah. Why
Now, can
can't?
we just get to
Why
the-
can't you be consistent then?
anything not to talk about? Left.
No.
is
No. I'm just. I've been talking. We've been
It's
talking.
happening now,
We've been
not
talking.
12 years ago.
We've been talking about it this entire time. But I just want to make sure you're consistent.
Really? You just want to make sure I'm consistent?
Yeah.
Is that your
Yes.
intention behind
Yes.
this?
Actually, yes.
You want to know if I'm a consistent dealer in?
Yes,
whatever
I
the
do.
fuck?
Yes, I do.
First of all,
Because that's what you're doing
I
here,
already
right?
told
Because
you,
that's what
I
you're doing.
don't
Because that's what
know
you're doing here,
all that
right?
much about Jan 6.
You know enough. You know more about Jan 6 than you do about this stuff, right?
What?
You know more about Jan 6 than what's
Test
occurring
me.
here.
I'm pretty ignorant. Test me.
I'm asking you whether you know more about Jan 6 than these events.
What does it even mean as a comparative claim?
Oh
Like, I
my
know
God,
more about
dude! I'm talking
this
to a
than another
postmodernist,
thing?
dude. you know you're inconsistent. You know that you're committed to, if this is a rebellion, then you're committed to the notion that Jan 6 is a rebellion. And that's why you're not answering. If you had some kind of reasoned principle to distinguish the cases, you would provide it, but you can't.
Okay, can we just get back on the point of what is even the point? What's the point of this if you're just going to go back to Jan 6 all the time? Like,
well, I want to show and demonstrate that
people
the
rioting in the streets, they're burning down businesses, they're
they're burning. Wait, sorry,
cars.
they're burning down businesses. Can you show me where they're burning down businesses?
Excuse me, is Google a business?
I'm sorry. Are they burning down businesses?
Business?
What does it mean to burn down a business?
What do you?
So what do you mean by burning down a business?
Businesses always brick and
So
mortar?
what do you mean by burning? So I'm asking, what do you mean by burning down businesses?
Well, when you what do I mean by burning down businesses? I mean when you light a business on fire.
Okay.
Waymo business, right? Is it not?
So if you burn one thing of, so I just want to be clear. If you burn one thing of a business, you're burning down the business. Is that right? That's what you mean by the term?
Is that what I mean by the term? I mean, it would depend on the thing. If you burn down, say, a candy bar, I mean, if you burn down a whole fucking car, I think we're kind of edging into, you're burning down a business.
I think when people say burning down a business,
That's an expensive car. That's a lot of
I think
shit,
when people say burning down a business, they're referring to a dwelling, or either a dwelling or a building, some kind of construction, some kind of house, some kind of building. That's what they mean when burning down a business.
Well, these Waymo things are worth more than a lot of brick and mortar buildings as far as
They may be. I'm just telling you what I think people mean when they say burning down a business.
Okay, well, I meant Waymo cars, so.
Okay.
Hey.
So if that's what you mean by yes, they're burning down businesses under that definition.
Yep. All right, and they're looting. Is that not true?
Some people are looting, but I think those are opportunists probably, unless you can prove otherwise.
And I mean, who knows? But I don't know why the.
What's your point? What do you want? Like, yeah, I've already condemned violence. I've condemned looting. I've condemned burning down the Waymos. I condemned before this the Teslas on prominent platforms.
I want you to say it's reasonable. I want you to say it's.
What's reasonable?
Okay. I want you to say it's reasonable for Trump to, send
it's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. For one reason, independent reason. One reason independently is that it's illegal what he's doing. So that by itself, in my mind, makes it
maybe the
unreasonable.
way he's doing it is not legal.
Okay, yeah. So that's one independent reason. The second is it's counterproductive in that it's increasing the amount of protests. It's not decreasing.
Oh, yes. This is another thing I wanted to get you on. Okay. So this whole, enforcing the law, inflames tension. Yeah, I don't buy that. I think, you got people breaking the law, you enforce the law, and if that means you send in more people, then you send in more people.
So when you say you don't buy that, do you mean it's logically impossible for that to be true? Is that what you mean by you don't buy it?
Logically impossible? That's a high bar, but...
is it logically impossible?
No, I don't think it's logically
okay,
impossible.
So when you say you don't buy that increased government presence could inflame things, what do you mean by that? You don't buy it?
Okay, what I don't buy is why would putting more people there to cause order be bad, right? I mean, don't you want?
No, well, you said you don't buy something. I'm asking you what you mean by you don't buy it. Now you're asking me a question.
Historical example.
No, I'm asking you what you mean by when you say you don't buy it. I'm asking you what you mean literally by that phrase.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's likely. Basically,
okay.
I think it's reasonable for Trump to yeah. Okay. So as a result,
why do you think it's not likely?
Summer, whatever the fuck. Okay. Well, the summer of love, right? You had all these protests going out of control, and then it stopped when Trump sent in the National Guard, right? Or the governor sent in the National Guard.
So it was Trump. It was Trump himself in that context that withheld from sending a lot of National Guard units and federalizing some of them. Not always. There were some places where they were federalized, but on the rationale that getting direct federal control would inflame the tensions. That was one of the rationales.
But, it seemed tensions inflated themselves just fine without these, national people there.
Well, you don't know if it
So-
would have been worse if he had done what he's doing now. So what he's doing now is before we had
If
a
they just nipped in the
before
bud?
before we had
Probably
a,
not.
before we
Probably
had
would've
before
not
we
been
had
worse.
before we had like 100 people around a nice detention center, but now when the news gets that he's invoking this authority, now they're spreading across the country.
And that's somehow legitimate? Like,
Whether it's legitimate or
are we
not,
supposed to be
whether
cowed?
whether
Does the
it's
state not have a
whether
monopoly
it's
in violence?
legitimate or not, we're not. That's not the question before you. The question is it likely that Trump is inflaming the tensions? The answer is absolutely, of course he is.
No, I don't buy that.
Why not?
And insofar as he's inflaming the tensions,
You say he's not. You don't buy it.
no, because you let people, surround and beat ICE employees in one city, they're going to do it in another city. All right. And you're going to have, more and more of these instances pop up. And so you got to nip in the bud now while it's small.
But he's making it bigger. That's
But
my argument. My argument is he's
as
making it
you
bigger.
have
My
it-
argument is he's making it bigger.
Your argument is he's making it bigger, but
Yes.
how do you know?
Well,
Yes.
one is because of the I believe the events in this case show that before Trump made his threats, before he talked about nationalizing, and before he actually nationalized, before he sent the Marines, this was quite localized. It was largely contained. It was not that many people. But after Trump is making this a big deal, and he's invoking these crazy authorities, more people's attention's on it, more eyes are on it. He's brought all of these people sort of their attention and the media's attention on this. And so by doing an all of government effort where you even have the military weighing in on it, you have Hegseth talking about it, you have everyone in the government talking about it, he is blowing up the importance of this event. And so because more eyes on it, more attention on it, it's causing more resistance in the sense that it's factually causing it. And I can see linear time, and what was a small scale protest that was localized in one area is now spreading across the country. And I think that I draw a reasonable inference that that what he did in drawing all these eyes to it and bringing more attention to it is making them more. It's making more protests occur out of resistance.
Well, okay. Well, I think by a similar token, people are seeing the resistance, the brave, National Guardsmen, and now I see Marines that are, coming against us strongly, and they're, fighting back against these.
Stop changing the subject. The question is whether or not Trump's response is inflaming tensions. That's the question. Stop changing
And
the
I
subject.
think these leftist hooligans will be cowed. I think they will be cowed eventually.
Okay, where's the
All
evidence of that? Because it's spreading.
No, it's not. Have you seen? It's actually quelled down since he's brought in these guardsmen. So
You
I
sure
don't know
about
what you're
that? They're
talking
planning now a big, humongous protest on the 14th. They're warning
They're
about
planning
it.
a big protest on the 14th.
Yeah, and then
Well,
it's
they're
happening
warning
in in other cities too, in other states.
So you know it's going to be violent, do you?
No, I don't.
But you don't.
Also, that's not changing the subject.
How can you say he's
And
inflaming tensions?
that's changing the subject.
No, it's not.
What do you mean it's
Because
not?
you say he's inflaming tensions. He's causing more,
But then you ask whether or not you know it's going to be violent.
violence.
I don't know that it's going to be violent, but I do know that he's making it worse. He's inflaming tensions.
No, I think he's cowing these people who are violent. Like that's what he's doing.
Okay,
And,
but
they should be
he's
cowed.
more information and more attention and a whole of government response and blowing this up and using the kind of mass like that rhetoric and saying it's getting people's jimmies riled up. You understand that concept? Riling up the jimmies?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
he's
guess, but
he's riling up the jimmies. He's rustling the jimmies. That's what he's doing.
understand the concept of quelling of rebellion.
I
or
understand that.
quelling agitators or quelling.
Do you understand that concept? Because it clearly wasn't at play in January 6th, but even put that aside, I understand that you can sometimes, and you agree with this, quote unquote, quelling something can actually make it worse. Correct?
Yeah, but it could also sometimes just quell it. So, it seems like these matters.
Yeah, but
are
here
hard.
it
seems
looks
these
like
matters are
here
difficult.
it looks
seems
like here it
we
looks like
should
it's
let
inflaming
people who are,
tensions. Here it looks like it's
experienced in law
inflaming
enforcement
tensions.
Make these decisions.
Well, the people on the ground
you're-
said the people on the ground, right? The LAPD said it made things worse.
Yeah, no shit, because they're liberals appointed by
Well,
liberals. Like, come on.
You just the LAPD. First of all, the left
Hate
hates the left hates the LAPD. I hope you know that, right?
But these aren't rank and file. These aren't
Do
rank and
do
file
you
guys.
do you
They're
agree
just
that the left hates the LAPD?
Yeah,
Okay,
but
so
these
they're
aren't
not
the
they're
rank
not
and file
so
guys
a
who
lot
are
of these
saying it.
a lot of these leftists, right, are literally attacking
Uh-huh.
LAPD people.
Yeah, it's bad. Can you say that?
Okay, so when the LAPD says this made things worse, why don't you believe them?
What do you mean the LAPD? What is the LAPD said? What
The
does that mean?
chief of the
Who
LAPD,
said?
the head of it.
Liberal appointed by liberal. Liberal appointed by liberal mayor.
Okay,
Come
so
on.
we're not going to trust the
Who hates
police.
Trump?
We're not going to trust the police, right?
Political appointee. We're not going to trust a political appointee. How about that? Is that better? Yeah.
so
Of a
yes.
liberal? Yeah, sure. I
Okay,
don't
so
trust
you don't trust
Yeah.
them. So
Call me crazy.
what would it take for you to be convinced
No, I
that?
don't-
What,
not that I
so I'm
don't
asking.
trust
What would I have to show
You're
you?
equivocating.
What would I have to show you? What evidence would I have to present to you that Trump is actually making things worse? What it would take to convince you?
A big historical analysis, a big analysis of, expert
Okay.
opinion on law enforcement saying, this and that. But it doesn't seem like you're an expert in law enforcement. I'm not an expert in law enforcement. Trump's got a lot of experts in law enforcement working for him, and we got this historical.
Yeah, it seems like they're
precedent
itching.
of, you know,
They're
didn't
itching to
quell
use
the
this.
summer protests.
They're itching to use these authorities. That's why they've invoked these authorities. That's why they talked about it in Project 2025. That's why they keep talking about using the military on American civilians. That's why they're saying that we want military to be used for immigration purposes. They've already started using military for immigration purposes at the border. And so, yeah, I totally think that they want this to occur. That's clear from their rhetoric. And the LAPD seems to suggest that it made things worse. The point of fact is that the protests and the violence got worse after he made those announcements. It actually did. That now that there are more protests spreading across the country, so in terms of the causality, the factual nature of it, what you have to argue somehow is that it would have happened either way, whether they did this response or not. But I don't think that's what the evidence shows. I think I'm convinced that had Trump let it die down a little bit, had Trump just let the state handle it, I don't think it's at all plausible that this would have blown up the way it has. I think Trump's trying to go to specific response, and that's what all the evidence indicates, in my opinion. We have a victory out of the Northern District of California. So overseeing the case is Judge Breyer. So not Judge Stephen Breyer, but his brother, who sits on the federal district court for the Northern District of California. And it's an order granting plaintiff's application, that is Newsom and the state of California, their application for a TRO. And remember, by the way, when I said don't necessarily read too much into the refusal to grant a TRO in that moment. Remember when I said that, guys? So this is why. Now, keep in mind, there's still other litigation that needs to happen, but I just want to switch over to that opinion real quick so we can react in real time to that opinion. So just give me 1 second to switch my source. Okay. On June 6th, this is the district court. This is their order. On June 6, 2025, the federal government initiated immigration raids across the city. Protests followed. Individuals involved were unruly, even violent. State and local law enforcement responded. The following day, Trump ordered that members of the National Guard be federalized and thereupon assume control of those forces. At this early stage of the proceeding, the court must determine whether the president followed the congressionally mandated procedure for his action. Procedure. This is for procedure. Let's just highlight maybe. This is crazy. He did not. Trumpy. Remember when I was talking to that guy? His actions were illegal. Trump, both exceeding the scope of his statutory authority and violating the 10th Amendment. He must therefore return control of the California National Guard to the governor of the state of California forthwith. Now, I cheated and read ahead, and I know that this is stayed for a little bit to give him a chance to appeal. Trump gets all of these special perks. The special perks of being Trump is, you get all this immunity, you get all of this crazy fast litigation whenever you want it, and slow litigation whenever you want it. The Supreme Court will basically hear whatever you want it to hear. The Supreme Court is basically going to issue stays whenever they want. You always get the admin stay. It's always in your favor. So it's not a nice perks of being the president, of being Trump, specifically President Trump. We know that the California National Guard is this thing. Trump is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces, including the National Guard, when it is under federal control. Very important, right? So when it's not under federal control, Trump is not the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. Understand that, right? Even though it's the same people, right? It's the same people. But when it's not under federal control, he's actually not the commander-in-chief. But when the National Guard is not under federal control, it's the governor that has control. It's the state militia. A president can call National Guard into federal service under Title 10. That is what happened here. California has the largest National Guard in the country with almost 20,000 members, 12,000 of whom are available. They're super important to a bunch of shit, like the National Guard, right? The militia in general does a bunch of things for the governor, right? The militia is in charge of like doing a bunch of stuff. The governor has the militia doing stuff, okay? On June 6th, ICE began carrying out immigration raids. The AP reported that ICE executed search warrants at multiple locations. You know, they targeted some Home Depots, a donut store, a clothing wholesaler, a bunch of people detained. State and state leaders expressed concern and disapproval. Newsom said that it was chaotic. They're not targeting violent criminals. Some members of the public gathered. A group of people assembled at the site of an ICE operation in Los Angeles Garment District and tried to prevent ICE from leaving. Another one of the primary protests on June 6th took place at the Metropolitan Detention Center. The governor's Office of Emergency Services was in regular communication with LAPD, Sheriff's Department, but they did not need additional resources. LAPD was like under control. That evening, protesters marched in LA, about 800 people. Some threw concrete chunks and bottles of liquid and other objects at Federal Protective Service officers. So this is what I take to be most likely the insurrection, okay? This activity. You're using force or intimidation against federal law enforcement to dissuade them from enforcing federal immigration law. This is equivalent to like the tax cases from back in the day, okay? Officers protected the gate entrance with pepper balls and other non-lethal force. LAPD arrived and pushed the crowd away. Oh, this is where we were, yeah. So this kind of action I would analogize to some of the tax insurrections potentially. So this is, of all the things, right, probably the most approximated a minimal insurrection that occurred. LAPD declared unlawful assembly. Some resisted, others departed. On June 7th, both the ICE operations in response to protests continued. In addition to the protests also emerged in Paramount and Compton. A bunch of deputies there. The Metropolitan Detention Center was fairly in control during the evening hours of June 7. Basically not a ton of people there. There was some clash between protesters and officers, some damage to the fence, 11 people arrested. President Trump intervened in the response to the protests on the evening of June 7th, issuing a memorandum to the Secretary of Defense. The memo asserted that numerous incidents of violence and disorder have recently occurred and threatened to continue in response. And he said they constitute a form of rebellion. He directed Hegseth to coordinate with the governors of the states, so not just California. He could employ these members as necessary. Blah, blah, blah. We know the facts here. The National Guard troops arrived on June 8th, but it was not clear what they were doing there. The National Guard seemed to inflame the protesters. LAPD chief said things have gotten out of control. LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, the Highway Patrol deployed to protests that were blocking the highway. Guys, don't block the highway. They were burning Waymos. Can we pour one out for our buddies in the Waymos? And by buddies, I mean the Waymos themselves. The same day, Newsom's office wrote to Hegseth stating that it did not comply with the law or even with Trump's own memo. It inflamed everything. On social media, Hegseth posted and said that these active duty Marines are being deployed to enforce and restore order. Over the course of the protest, state and local law enforcement arrests increased by the day, with over 400 individuals ultimately being arrested. Bunch of procedural history. They filed suit immediately, saying that it exceeded the scope of their authority. Cause of action, ultravirus, and violation of the 10th Amendment, and violation of the Administrative Procedures Act, APA. They want injunctive declaratory relief, and they also motioned for a TRO, and defendants oppose. We know the standard for a TRO, discussion. Oh boy, it's the big one, likelihood of success on the merits, most important. of the factors, of the four factors. Plaintiffs bring three claims: an ultra vires claim, a 10th Amendment claim, and an APA claim. Ultra vires is just a way of saying that this is beyond your scope of authority, that you can't do this. You can't do that. Then a 10th Amendment and also an APA claim, but rely only on the first two for purposes of their motion for a TRO. So the TRO is only based on ultra vires and 10th Amendment, so they're not going to get into APA for the TRO. Chris Evans. As part of their ultra vires claim, plaintiffs contend Trump exceeded his authority in 3 ways. First, he cited 10 U.S.C. 12406, which permits the president to federalize the National Guard, but none of the conditions were met. So the preconditions of rebellion, of unable to enforce the laws, and of the last one, which is invasion, apply. So those are the preconditions claims. The second is that there's no procedural requirements. They didn't issue the order through the governors. And third, there's an unlawful purpose under posse comitatus. The court addresses these 3 arguments before the 10th Amendment claims. The precondition, through the Militia Act, the Congress authorized president to call forth the militia, right? Those are the 3 preconditions. We read them all. There's no insurrection, interestingly, here. If there was an insurrection provision here, I probably would say that you have met one of the preconditions for insurrection. And it's actually pretty funny. I think that you could meet insurrection, but be unable to do 3. And I think that you can't reach number 2. There's no rebellion. And you obviously can't do number 1. And so I think that if there were here for insurrection, if there were something there that said insurrection, the precondition would probably be met. It would actually be, I would love it actually if, I wouldn't love it, but because I want Trump to lose, obviously. But if there were a condition here that was insurrection, I would love the court to finally give a ruling that went to the Supreme Court about what an insurrection is. I would love that, even though the court would probably dodge and be like, we can't answer this question. Fucking cucks. Neither Trump nor Hegseth specified a citation to the statute, which is one of the conditions. So you haven't even told us which of these. A memorandum suggests that he relied on the second, the third, or both. I agree with that. That's the best reading. Defendants confirm that they rely on the second and third conditions. Great. Defendants also challenge whether the court can even properly evaluate the conditions, asserting that 12406 reserved it to the president's discretion alone. So that's the whole, courts can decide this question. So first, can we even decide this? Oh, we got our favorite. As soon as you see Marbury versus Madison, you're like, this court's about to do something. Court's about to do something. It is emphatically the providence and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. You should just know that quote, guys, so you can use it every time your interlocutor is being a bit sketchy. You can say, it is emphatically the province of the judicial department to say what the law is. It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department. That's how I say it. Thus, federal courts have no more right to decline the exercise of a jurisdiction which is given than to usurp that which is not given. Supreme Court has recognized only one limited exception, political question. Some questions are political questions. Baker versus Carr, canonical case. We go through the Baker factors. Defendants contend that there is the third Baker formulation, that there's clearly existence of a policy question clearly for non-judicial discretion. They rely on the language to the president's determination. Indeed, at the hearing, contended that the president could invoke 12406 on no evidence whatsoever and remain immune from judicial review. So they're basically saying the president can, these preconditions are more like guidelines, right? This is the pirate code. These are more like guidelines. That all these preconditions exist and it doesn't really matter. The president could just look at them and be like, yep, this guy stole my ice cream and so we have a rebellion and you can't review it, courts. I think that's a bad litigation strategy to admit to that, but that is the opinion of the Trump administration on many things. Defendants misconstrue the plain language of 12406. However, the statute permits the president to federalize the National Guard whenever one of the 3 enumerated conditions are met, not whenever he determines that they're met. I love that. Yeah, 100%. The same thing for the Alien Aliens Act thing, by the way. So it's that the president has the discretion when those conditions exist to call forth the militia, but he can't have this unreviewable discretion to determine the preconditions. Defendants point to the language providing the president may call into federal service members and units of the National Guard of any state in such numbers as he considers necessary. But their argument puts the cart before the horse. For the president to exercise his discretion, as to how many guards may be federalized, there must first be an invasion, rebellion, or inability to execute the laws. Notice there's no insurrection there, hence the Insurrection Act. Consider as an analogy 5 U.S.C. 3345, which applies if an officer of an executive agency whose appointment to office is required to be made by the president dies, resigns, or is unable to perform the functions and duties of the office. The president's discretion in what to do next does not mean that the president can unilaterally and without judicial review declare that a vacancy exists in order to fill it. That is classic ipse dixit. Classic ipse dixit. Defendants assert that despite the plain language of the statute, the Supreme Court's Martin versus Mott decision compels a different outcome. Martin, the case, arose from a militiaman's refusal to enter federal service to fight in the War of 1812 after Madison had ordered the New York militia into federal service pursuant to a predecessor statute to the Militia Act of 1903. The statute provided that whenever the United States shall be invaded or in imminent danger of invasion from any foreign nation or Indian tribe, it shall be lawful for the President of the United States to call forth such numbers of the militia of the state as necessary to repel such invasion. Martin thus presented the question, is the president the sole and exclusive judge whether the exigency has arisen or is to be considered as an open question upon which every officer to whom the orders of the president are addressed may decide for himself and equally open to be contested by every militiaman who shall refuse to obey the orders of the president. The Supreme Court held that the authority to decide whether the exigency has arisen belongs exclusively to the president and that his decision is conclusive upon all other persons. It stated that the president is necessarily constituted the judge of the existence of the exigency in the first instance and is bound to act according to his belief of the facts. And so the court concluded that whenever a statute gives a discretionary power to any person to be exercised by him upon his own opinion of certain facts, it is a sound rule of construction that the same statute constitutes him the sole and exclusive judge of the existence of those facts. Okay, that seems like a pretty good case for the administration. In JAV versus Trump, a challenge to the President Trump's actions under the Alien Enemies Act, the federal government relied on Martin to make a similar argument to the one they make here. The plaintiffs in that case were Venezuelan citizens who alleged that President Trump's removal of the Venezuelan citizens had exceeded the terms of the Alien Enemies Act, which allows the president in his discretion to remove certain non-citizens when any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened. President Trump argued there, as he does here, that the political question doctrine shielded his attempt to remove them from the United States because when the AEA's preconditions are satisfied, is a political question committed to the president's discretion. And he cited Martin for the same proposition as he does here. Judge Rodriguez rejected President Trump's attempt to preclude judicial review. He emphasized that questions of interpretation fall within the judiciary's responsibility, and that this can involve analyzing whether a government official has impermissibly crossed statutory boundaries by determining the meaning of statutory terms and gauging the president's actions against those determined parameters. Accordingly, he went on to define invasion and predatory incursion before concluding that Trump has not adequately established the existence of either. The court agrees with Judge Rodriguez's thoughtful reasoning in JAV and finds it applicable here. To start, JAV is in line with other recent decisions rebuffing efforts from defendants to skirt judicial review. So there's all these other cases where he's saying that he can't get reviewed. See also Zivotofsky, these other Supreme Court cases. It is also consistent with the long line of precedent recognizing the judiciary's role in interpreting statutory text. Finally, even though the AEA and 12406 are different statutes, they both grant the president discretion in some respects while still containing important statutory conditions that must be met. Accordingly, the court concludes that 12406 does not preclude judicial review of whether a rebellion has occurred or is in danger of occurring, or whether the president is unable to execute federal law. To be sure, based on long-standing deference to the president on materials of national security and foreign policy, courts cannot second-guess a president's factual determinations. Oh, he's citing, interesting. He's citing this case that basically you have to, I don't like this, but you have to adhere to the president's factual determinations. But once you have those factual determinations, you don't have to adhere to their legal determinations. So you can sort of apply the facts as given by the executive, you can give deference to it, and then you can apply it to some sort of judicial standard, okay? As discussed below, the court here, like Judge Rodriguez and JAV, does not question defendants' factual assertions, so they are paying deference to the factual assertions of the president. We just consider whether the factual assertions, if true, constitute a rebellion or make the president unable to execute the federal law. That said, the court points out that this case is not one involving the kind of foreign policy or national security questions that are traditionally left to the president. It, in a sense, implicates the domestic use of military force, a matter in which the courts can certainly weigh in. So we're going to pay probably less deference to the court's to the domestic kind of invocations. Between the unique concerns raised by the federal military intrusion into civilian affairs and the fact that the federal officials are not uniquely positioned to ascertain what is happening on the ground as compared to like the state and local officials, the court is not convinced that judiciary cannot question presidential assertions about domestic activities leading to military action. I love that. I love that distinction. So we don't have to adhere to your factual determinations domestically versus foreignly. So we have to defer to you on foreign policy matters, perhaps on facts, but not domestically. I love that. That's a great distinction. At bottom, 12406 is not reserved to the sole presidential discretion in the determination of whether a rebellion or the unable to execute federal law condition exists. Now they're going to see whether there is. 12406 does not define rebellion, so the court must interpret the term according with its ordinary meaning. In this endeavor, the court may turn to contemporary dictionaries for insight. And where there are multiple definitions, they have to choose the appropriate one. So now they're looking to definitions from Black's Law Dictionary. Open, organized, and armed resistance to an established government or ruler, an organized attempt to change the government. The court's own research has turned up the following definitions from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Deliberate, organized resistance by force and arms to the laws and operations of the government committed by a subject. An open and avowed renunciation, open resistance to lawful authority. Where dictionaries list multiple definitions of rebellion, the first dictionary is the one demanded by context here. The first definition of rebellion in each dictionary is political in nature, as opposed to the more open-ended concept of rebellion that some dictionaries provide as a secondary definition. Indeed, dictionaries' examples of the secondary usage of the term never apply in the political arena. And then if there were any room for doubt, the language of 12406 resolves the question in favor of the political definition of rebellion. From there, the court observes that the dictionary definition from the turn of the centuries shares several key characteristics. First, a rebellion must not only be violent, but also be armed. Interesting. Second, a rebellion must be organized. Third, a rebellion must be open and avowed. Fourth, a rebellion must be against the government as a whole, often with the aim of overthrowing the government, rather than in opposition to a single law or issue. So this is what I would take to be an insurrection, right? An insurrection is the opposition to a single law. The protesters in Los Angeles fall far short of rebellion. Defendants refer to violent rioters and mobs, and so the court pauses to say that there can be no debate that most protesters demonstrated peacefully. Nonetheless, it is also beyond debate that some individuals use the protests as an excuse for violence and destruction. A violent crowd boxing officers, blah, blah, blah. Violence is necessary for rebellion, but not sufficient. Even accepting the questionable premise that people armed with fireworks, rocks, mangoes, concretes, chairs, or bottles of liquid are, quote, armed in a 1903 sense. The court is aware of no evidence in the record of actual firearms. There's little evidence of whether the violent protesters' actions were open or avowed. Some presumably engaged in violently with officers at close quarters in daylight, while many others threw items under the cover of darkness, protected by a crowd, identities concealed. Certainly the peaceful protesters were organized to some degree in that people knew generally to go to these protests. But there's no evidence of an organized as apart from sporadic or impromptu violence, nor is there evidence that any of the violent protesters were attempting to overthrow the government as a whole. The evidence is overwhelming. So, by the way, this is what I would take to be for rebellion, okay? Not for insurrection, just to be clear. The evidence is overwhelming that protesters gathered to protest a single issue, the immigration rates. While defendants have pointed to several instances of violence, they have not identified a violent, armed, organized, open, and avowed uprising against the government as a whole. The definition of rebellion is unmet. Moreover, the court is troubled by the implication inherent in defendants' arguments that protests against the federal government, a core civil liberty protected by the First Amendment, can justify a finding of rebellion. U.S. reports are chock full of language explaining the importance of individuals' rights to speak out against the government, even when it's uncomfortable, even when provocative, even when doing so is inconvenient. Blah, blah, blah. Let's try to speed through this. Applying these principles, courts have repeatedly reaffirmed the peaceful protest does not lose its protection just because some people act violently. The idea that protesters can so quickly cross a line between protected conduct and rebellion is untenable and dangerous. In a short paragraph, defendants suggest that even if there was no rebellion, it would justify federalizing the National Guard because there was a danger of rebellion. This argument cannot withstand scrutiny. For starters, they did not rely on this in the actual memo. It is concerning, to say the least, to imagine that the federal executive could unilaterally exercise military force in a domestic context and then be allowed to backfill justifications for doing so. So you can't have post hoc justification. But in any event, they do not explain how the court should determine whether there is a danger of rebellion. Rebellion remains the operative word, and so any difference between rebellion and danger of rebellion must be a difference of degree, not of kind. Defendants have not established a factual basis, again, even assuming their factual assertions to be correct, from which they can conclude there's a danger of an organized, violent, armed uprising with a goal of overthrowing the lawful government of the United States. Accordingly, defendant does not satisfy rebellion condition. Execution of law, the third condition, is that he's unable to execute the laws. Defendants argue that they satisfy this because LA protests threaten the safety of law enforcement. Defendants concede that ICE succeeded in arresting a bunch of people, and that had the protests not interfered with their operations, ICE would have been able to carry out additional execution of law activity. Whether ICE could have detained more people is mere conjecture. Defendants provide no support for this assertion. Even assuming the defendants are correct, however, the statute does not allow for federalizing National Guard when the president faces obstacles. Nor does the statute allow for the federalizing of National Guard when the president faces some risk. That's always inherent, right? The statute requires the president is unable to execute the laws. That did not happen here. A classic example of a president being unable to execute the laws, indeed the only other time in this country's history that a president has exclusively relied on 12406 is the 1970 Postal Service strike. Frustrated by low pay and poor working conditions, letter carriers voted to strike, threatening to bring the nation to a standstill. By March 1970, the mail service was paralyzed. There were a bunch of crazy shit that happened. Nixon declared a state of a national emergency and then got the National Guard to get the mail moving. In that case, the mail system was incapacitated. The regular forces of letter carriers were on strike, no other way to deliver the mail. In this case, the regular forces were and are still very much on duty. While ICE was not able to detain as many people as the defendant believes it could have, ICE was nonetheless able to execute the federal immigration laws. Indeed, ICE continues to carry out enforcement actions executing those laws. So they can execute the law. And then the procedural requirement. So they're winning on many bases. They're winning on the substance of the preconditions, and they're winning on the procedural requirement. Plaintiffs assert that Trump failed to comply with the procedural requirement of going through the governor. Defendants assert they complied with 12406 because they wrote at the top of the order, quote, through the governor of California. True enough, but an interpretation of 12406 that permits the president to federalize the state's National Guard by typing the phrase through the governor of insert state here at the top of a document the president never sends to the governor strains credulity, especially given that Congress specifically amended the statute to add that requirement that orders be issued through the governors. Defendants also argue that they complied with this requirement by sending the order to California's adjutant general, who is tasked with issuing orders in the name of the governor. But 12406 specifically requires the orders federalizing the National Guards to be issued through the governor of the respective state, not through a different state official, even one who can issue orders in the governor's name. Indeed, when Congress has wanted to accommodate other state officials, it has done so expressly. For example, the Secretary of State may order a member of a reserve component under his jurisdiction to active duty, except the members may not be ordered to active duty without the consent of the governor or other appropriate authority of the state concerned. And in fact, 12406 specifically provides for, in the case of District of Columbia, that they go through the command in general. As a final point, plaintiffs emphasize that defendants did not provide Governor Newsom an opportunity to provide or withhold his consent or even to consult. Defendants respond that 12406 is nothing about obtaining the government's consent. They are correct. 12406 does not expressly require consent or approval to federalize. That said, the June 7 memo specifically ordered Hegseth to coordinate with the governors of the states in the process of calling National Guard members to federal service, and defendant does not claim to have done so. In any case, the instant motion does not require the court to determine whether or how 12406 would operate if Hegseth had attempted to issue his orders through Newsom and he had refused, as the president and secretary circumvented the governor and thus the procedure mandated by the statute from the outset. Regardless of whether defendants gave Governor Newsom an opportunity to consult with them or consent to the federalization of California National Guard, they did not issue the orders through him and thus failed to comply with 12406. Posse comitatus, the plaintiff's third argument, rests on a different legal authority. Posse comitatus, first enacted in 1878, the act prohibits military personnel from acting as a posse comitatus or those upon whom a sheriff could call for assistance. It says, whoever, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by Constitution or Act of Congress, willfully uses any part of the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, or the Space Force as a posse comitatus or otherwise to execute the laws shall be fined under this title. So, or imprisoned. So it's a crime, right, to take the military and use them in this respect. The act reflects a strong resistance to military intrusion into civilian affairs, deep roots in our history, blah, blah, blah. Posse comitatus act does not provide a private cause of action for damages, but a plaintiff can bring an ultra-virus claim, whereas plaintiff asserts, in this case here, an agency has disregarded a specific and unambiguous statutory directive or has violated some specific command of a statute. So if plaintiffs are correct that President Trump and Hegseth's federalization requires National Guard members to violate the Posse Comitatus Act, such a violation may provide a basis for the ultra-virus claim. At present, plaintiffs contend that the federalized National Guard troops and the Marines are likely to engage in an active involvement in the execution of the laws in violation of Posse Comitatus. They concede that there are a number of supportive activities in which the military can engage without running afoul of the act, such as maintenance and repair, blah, blah, blah. But federalized National Guard members will soon provide support during immigration enforcement operations, not only at federal buildings. So there's a bunch of stuff that they're doing that isn't acceptable under posse comitatus. While the sight of an armed National Guard member no doubt has the potential to intimidate, plaintiffs do not contend that National Guard members have in fact participated in any arrests. Defendants respond they have not violated the act and will not. Of course, federal officials do not only act through official documents. Trump reportedly wrote on social media that he has directed his cabinet officials to take any actions necessary to liberate Los Angeles from migrant invasion. And we're going to have troops everywhere. It certainly differs from the circumcised role professed in the opposition brief. Right, so they go on Twitter and they talk a big game, and then when they're on the fucking, you know, the big dog, small dog memes? So they go on Twitter and they act very tough. But then in litigation, they're like, we're not planning anything. And then behind the scenes, they're like, yeah, we're going to fucking do everything. We're not scared to go further. We're not frightened to do something if we need to. We're going to have U.S. military directly involved in detaining and arresting protesters. No, we're not doing this. The court has already concluded that defendants exceeded their lawful authority by violating 10 U.S.C. 12406. The court therefore need not reach the additional basis for plaintiff's ultra-virus claim at this early moment in the litigation. When the court has before it plaintiff's motion for preliminary injunction, the record will be more complete as to all and any and all military activities, and the parties will be free to make whatever arguments they wish in connection with posse comitatus. So they haven't decided posse comitatus. Finally, we have 10th Amendment. Plaintiff's second claim in their complaint is that the federalization violates the 10th Amendment. Focusing on the first part of plaintiff's argument, defendants argue the 10th Amendment issue is wholly derivative of 12406. That's what the defendants say. And because defendants assert they did not violate 12406, they contend there's no 10th Amendment problem. Yet the court has concluded they did violate 12406, so their argument starts from a flawed premise. And even if that were not the case, defendants failed to grapple with the second part of plaintiff's 10th Amendment claim that their use of the National Guard and the Marines comes into conflict with the California's police power. It is well established that the police power is one of the quintessential powers reserved to the states by the 10th Amendment. Although defendants identify some stray violent incidents related to the protests against ICE raids, and from there boldly claim that state and local officials were unable to bring rioters under control, it is not federal government's place in our constitutional system to take over a state's police power whenever it is dissatisfied with how vigorously or quickly the state is enforcing its own laws. Quite the contrary, the founders reserved that power and others to the states. Of course, federal authority extends to protecting legitimate federal interests such as protecting federal personnel and facilities. Plaintiffs do not contest this. As discussed above, the parties vigorously dispute whether the National Guard and Marines were deployed merely to protect personnel or engage in more routine law enforcement. And the court does not, at this point, reach any conclusion on the issue. But with respect to the 10th Amendment claim, that is not the only consideration at play. There's also the fact that the federalization of 4,000 members of California's National Guard necessarily prevents Governor Newsom, as the commander-in-chief, from deploying them as needed. Had defendants complied with the substantive and procedural requirements of 12406, the federal interest reflected by that statute may well override Governor Newsom's interest in retaining his National Guard members. But they did not. So whether or not the National Guard is exercising illegitimate federal police power in Los Angeles, the unlawful federalization of those members has interfered with the state's legitimate police power, and thus it violates the 10th Amendment. So basically they're saying this is bootstrapping the 12406 claim. It's possible that even if they had complied with 12406, that Newsom would still win. But here, because it's illegitimate under 12406, we don't even need to decide that situation. We already know it violates the 10th Amendment. But in conclusion, you should take the following thing. This is super, super duper based. Very cool, very awesome. We should have judicial review of some of these determinations. I think the court is doing something interesting with this distinction between like adhering to the factual determinations of the president vis-a-vis foreign matters, but not domestic. If there has to be some kind of absolute deference to factual determinations, I'd prefer it to be with foreign stuff and not domestic stuff, obviously, because you can't trust this administration or really any president. And I don't know why we would sort of adhere to their determinations on a domestic front. So that's very interesting, very base, very cool. And the basis of saying that ultimately California must be given back its National Guard is that the action is ultra-virus. It's ultra-virus because it violates the substantive preconditions of 12406 in that there is no rebellion. I agree with that. Even though there might be more likely than not an insurrection in some instances, I don't think that more likely than not that there's a rebellion. I agree with the court there. For perhaps different reasoning than the court in terms of their definition of rebellion. But again, my intuition about rebellion has to do with the founding era, not necessarily the 20th century. And he has to deal with the statute that was passed in 1903 or whatever, right? So, but we definitely agree with the judge that rebellion isn't met. We definitely agree that the president is able to execute the laws, that there's a substantive difference between like there being some danger or there being some like obstruction to the law versus totally being unable to enforce federal law, which they're obviously able to do. And they've been talking about how they're doing it. So that's one basis of the TRO, is that it's ultra virus. They haven't determined the posse comitatus. They're leaving it open. And ultimately, they're going to see whether or not what the military does. If the military starts engaging in regular law enforcement, then the posse comitatus might apply, and that's going to be for the PI. And then separately also, the 10th Amendment is sort of bootstrapping the 12406 determinations. Oh, sorry. And also it's ultra virus for under 12406 because as well, the procedural requirement isn't met of having the orders issued through the governor, right? So big categories, okay? Ultra virus, because the preconditions aren't met, no rebellion, no inability to execute the laws. 12406 also not met independently because procedural requirement, not just substantive, but beyond the preconditions, you haven't met the procedural requirement of having the orders go through the governor. All you did is said through the governor on some letterhead, and you send it to some other officer who's not the governor. So those are two reasons. Yeah, you can ask Aaron whatever you want. Why it's ultra virus under 12406. It may be illegal under posse comitatus. Not going to decide that right now. That's for later. It's also unconstitutional under the 10th Amendment because of bootstrapping the 12406 rationale, because we decided that it's illegal for the government to do this kind of thing under 12406. Obviously, you're illegitimately overriding the 10th Amendment police power of the states. And so there's necessarily a 10th Amendment violation if the federal action is itself illegal. And they're putting to the side for later, perhaps, supposing that the invocation were valid, it might still be unconstitutional under the 10th Amendment. Okay, so that's the setup there. So you have 12406, substantively and procedurally defect. Then you have posse comitatus, not deciding right now. And then you have 10th Amendment, bootstrapping 12406 rationale, but also leaving open the possibility of an additional 10th Amendment claim, even if 12406 is complied with or there is some other basis of the invocation here. And then the preliminary question about whether this is justiciable, the answer is yes, it's just justiciable. So a lot of different issues there. I hope I explained some of them. I'll take two questions before we transition to Trader Aid. I honestly cannot see how the military wouldn't intervene and at least assist civil law enforcement. Imagine they're co-located with police officers and there's an altercation. So if the governor is telling them to do something, right? If the governor is using them as a state militia would, right? If the governor is using them as you would use a state militia, different situation. Posse comitatus is very different. That's for military who are under federal service. Okay, so keep that in your mind. That when the National Guard is acting as militia, a lot broader ability to do whatever you want under state control, and that makes sense, right? Under state control, we have less of the fears of posse comitatus. It's a militia acting as a militia. What we're concerned about are these federal regulars, these federal members, right? These federal military members starting to override the states, override the people. So yeah, the National Guard, you can imagine situations in which they have to engage in civilian law enforcement or to help the civilian law enforcement when it's through the governors or when there's a valid invocation perhaps of the Insurrection Act of the federal service requirement there. So just keep that in mind, that you should treat the National Guard differently in terms analytically when they're under federal service versus when they're under the regular sort of state militia duties and under control of the governor. Does that make sense? Are protesters in D.C. more at risk of federal policing due to this lack of state governor? Right. In D.C., you're pretty much, you always have the National Guard of D.C. kind of acting under federal command. So there, it's not as much of an issue. It's already the president is ultimately in charge of the D.C. National Guard. Even though there are other like sort of commanders of the National Guard, the president is the ultimate decider for the D.C. National Guard.